Everyone, thank you for joining the April webinar. This month we are doing a pre-recording for our monthly webinar sessions as all of the CKP staff is at the University of Arkansas for the Food Waste and Hunger Summit. So today we're going to be hearing from Emma, who is our AmeriCorp Vista in the national office, and she's going to be talking about starting a community garden for your campus kitchen. So Emma, whenever you're ready.
Great. Thank you, Tyler, for not only asking me to come on the call, but just for letting me get everybody excited about starting a garden, especially now that it's going to be warmer. But yeah, so like Tyler was saying, my name is Emma. I'm the Vista here at the national office. And you're probably wondering, why would I talk about gardens? So about a couple of years ago, I actually was fortunate enough to live on an organic farm for about 5 or 6 months, and so I have a little bit of experience, I would say, definitely, roughing it and eating healthy and learning the process of growing. And here's a couple pictures of my experience, which was honestly probably the best thing I've ever done. I did a little bit of nutrition education with some of the schools within the area, was able to raise a couple pigs and chickens, turkeys, and did a lot of weeding. Definitely developed some good, thigh muscles. But yeah, so let me go ahead and get started. So this is kind of like the roadmap we're going to take. This is like the general time frame. So group vision, needs, grants, crop design, volunteers, and maintenance. So let's start with vision. So I'm going to go over 3 areas, how to go about determining your site, developing partnerships, and education aspects. So yeah, so a couple different realms you can go with developing a garden bed. Normally I always think the traditional, which is on the very left. This is something that my great ancestors, my grandparents, we always had gardens, and this is kind of what I think of, like straight in the ground. You start in April, you go to about October. That's usually your growing season. But then there's also other ways, especially determining your limitations and your access to land and resources. So you might want to drift more towards either a container, which is like fully off the ground, or a raised bed, which is just like, as it's saying, just a little bit raised. I'm pretty sure most of you might have seen each one of these or a mixture of the 3. But yeah, all of them will do pretty much essentially the same thing. It just depends on kind of what your needs are and kind of how you want to integrate into your campus kitchen operation. Another thing about your site, you need to think about where you're at. One great thing about the campus kitchen is that we're all over the country. But something like that, you're going to need to think about your temperature, where you're located in the U.S. And this is one way to this is like an overarching map from the USDA that determines your hardiness zone. And so depending on where you are, it's a geographic area that gives minimal temperatures. So, and this kind of determines the type of plants and growing season you'll have. So say Baylor University in Texas is going to be different from Boston. So as you can see in the map, there's 2 different zones, so there's going to be different growing seasons, and you're going to be limited on what kind of plants you're growing. Most likely in Baylor in Texas, you're going to have a longer growing season and more range of different plants compared to Boston, which is a little bit higher up. And the link is actually an interactive map, so you can actually click on it, and it will take you to the USDA, and then you can kind of click on which state you are. And since I'm from Indiana, I'll click on Indiana, and then it gives you a county view of what is your zone. And so I'm from Lafayette, so I'm in Tippecanoe, so a little bit of blue. So yeah, so it's a really nice tool, really good resources to kind of give you a basic realm of where you're located. Another one is soil quality. Sometimes we kind of forget that we need the soil to be the best it can be with the most nutrients, and sometimes we kind of forget what kind of soil we're working with. And going off that geographic region, you're going to have different types of soil quality. The 4 general types is sand, clay, silt, and loam. To give you a little bit of background on what each one and the characteristics, clay is normally what you think of. It's very compactable because there's small particles. So if you think about it's very compactable, you kind of think, is there any space for water to move through? not really for clay. So it holds moisture really well, but only the one thing, it just doesn't drain well. So if you overwater a plant that's in a very high clay soil, it's going to get rotting root, and the capacity for the plant to grow is very limited. And so the complete opposite is with sandy soils. So the soils, the particles are a little bit larger, so water is able to move very quickly through it, so it tends to be more dry. You know, kind of think of when you're on the beach, you know, mostly the sand is going to be dry. Silt is kind of in the middle in between sand and clay. It has a little bit larger particles than clay, lesser than sand, and is able to hold water a little bit better than sand, but not as much as clay. And then loam is just like it says, is just an equal mixture, and that is the desired type of soil quality you want for your plants, just because of the whole moisture content and being able to drain, excuse me. Another thing about soil quality, depending on your site, you definitely want to do some type of soil testing, because you are going to be growing produce that is going to be most likely feeding someone. And the nutrient uptake in the roots in the soils, if there's heavy metals or any type of chemicals in the soil, it'll go up into the plants. And you don't really want to feed that to your clients. So doing a soil testing, which you can definitely do either on campus through various departments, or you could take it to your co-op extension office, and they will do a soil testing for you. And then kind of from there, they'll give you options on how to either remediate the soil, if there's a lot of chemicals or heavy metals, or you just kind of have to like rethink where you're going to go. And then sun exposure. So you gotta plants during the growing season, they need at least 6 hours of direct sunlight. So this is kind of varies. So this picture, as you can see, it goes from north being on the very right, south on the left, east is, yes, east is the closest facing to us, I suppose, and then west. So you got to think of the sun patterns. So sun is rising and setting from east to west, and the southern slope is where you're going to get the most sun when it's in the summertime. So when deciding on the plot of area you want to go, you want to be on the southern slopes of the hills or the plains or wherever you're at. You want to be on the southern slope because that's where you're going to get your most sunlight, and you're less you're in a less way for shade or other limitations in terms of sun. So, and one best practice in terms of determining the sun patterns is to just take a few days to observe it and write a couple notes down. How much sunlight is getting there, what kind of shade is coming in, and then you can kind of determine based off that if that's the right plot. If not, you kind of have to like take a few days to figure that out. And along with the whole vision, you want to think about partnerships. I don't want to be daunting, but starting a garden is not exactly easy for one person to do. It's definitely doable, but within, you know, the time frame of it, and it's a lot for either just a one college student or just a small group. So developing those partnerships on campus and within the community is a great way to not only just to get people integrated with the garden and expand your volunteer base, but it's a great way to get donations. It's a great way to network and find places that may be able to donate some soil or donate some wood. So, and then also just providing advice. You know, further in the presentation, we're going to be talking about pests and weeds that could be common in the garden. And so, in terms of pests, you know, what are ways to eliminate them or to mediate them? So if you have partnerships with either like master gardeners or the horticulture department, biology department, if you think about these different areas that you can go into that might be able to give a little few tips or a little bit of suggestions of how to remediate that, it's a great way, and it lessens the stress and the burden, especially if you're new to this and don't have the background knowledge like, say, someone that's in horticulture or someone that's in a garden club. So like I was saying, some campus partnerships, the horticulture club, biology, entomology, insects, pests, garden club, service learning, work studies, and education departments. If one of your goals for the garden is to be able to do garden nutrition or nutrition education, look at those service learning teachers or teachers within or aspiring teachers in the education department. They may be willing to volunteer some time to teach within the community or teach within the garden. It could be a great partnership both ways. Community partnerships, like I was saying, those co-op extensions, which should be in every county. Master gardeners, senior centers. I think senior centers is a really, it's kind of like a flip turn. So it's one really great way, because think about a lot of the seniors, at least back where I'm from in Indiana, most of them are farmers. And so they grew up on farms. And so they know the techniques to a T. And they know how to get that perfect tomatoes. They have all these old ways of doing things that really can benefit you in these senior centers, quite possibly. The only limitation with that is just, you know, making sure it's safe, and if it's too low to the ground. So keep that open as an option, just because there is that such great knowledge base. But on the other hand, you got to be just a little careful in just terms of volunteering. And then also reach out to your hardware stores and local nurseries and greenhouses if you have them, because they may have plants that are either they're willing to donate or willing to donate knowledge. The worst thing they could say is no. So go reach out to these people. They're most likely going to be willing to help. Just develop some sort of partnership, make a connection, and then, you know, they may have someone that, you know, think of a hardware store. They may have someone that has all this extra lumber, but they don't know who to give it to, so they may have you as a contact. So just keep that in mind, and it could definitely benefit in the future. Some other community partnerships is Food Corps, which is actually an AmeriCorp position. This would be like more like an internship or a position on your community garden. And this is a great resource and a great tool to have if you're able to get that on your garden, because not only can they help with the maintenance of the garden, make sure operations are going smoothly, but they can also help with education, nutrition education, and also make partnerships within schools, which public schools or private schools. So getting kids involved in the garden along with students and along with faculty and staff in the community. And then farmers markets as well. You know, if you get to a point where your garden is producing at such a range that you're able to sell it and make a little bit of a profit back, think about getting a table at a farmer's market, or just have a table by itself to pass out info about your garden and pass out information about trying to volunteer or other options to get involved. And like I was saying, nutrition education. Here at the national office, we have a garden nutrition a garden-based nutrition education that was developed by a previous Vista here at DC and at Northwestern. So like I said, this is a 6-lesson curriculum that is based around garden activities. And normally you would think you would have to have it outside, but the great thing about this nutrition education plan is that you can do it inside as well. So there's modifications within the lessons. Say if you want to do a garden-based nutrition education, but you don't have your garden up and running yet. Those lesson plans can be modified so you can still do them inside while you're still working on the garden. And once you're ready, you can transfer in. And another awesome aspect about this, the nutrition education curriculum, is that it has a garden guide, which is full of best practices and tips, and literally is a more expanded and detailed view of this presentation, essentially. So it gives you ways to go about getting volunteers, how to develop maintenance plans, seedlings, transplants, anything that you can think about in terms of gardening. This is a great resource to have and to give a nice look over. So needs of a garden. When you're starting, you need to think of your purpose, your budget. You're probably going to want to start a committee or integrate the garden operations within your leadership team in terms of whether making a couple of new roles or developing a committee within your leadership team. And then thinking of maintenance. How much time are you able to devote to this garden? So like I was kind of saying earlier about the goals of the garden, it could possibly be a learning environment where not only can you bring, you know, young adults, we can bring children, seniors, kind of think of outside the box in terms of how you can make this a learning environment. The produce that is developed and harvested through the garden, you can use that in meal operations. So say if you have a ton of salad greens, you can have a fresh salad for your meal prep. Trainings and workshops. You can do like an herb garden and do like drying herbs or any type of workshop, or a training on pruning fruit trees if you have fruit trees within your community garden, or you could do a training on harvesting potatoes, which is actually a lot of fun. It doesn't sound like it, but it is. And having student involvement, like having different clubs, different groups, different, like I was saying, partnerships. And if you get to a point where your garden is very successful, you can have different garden sites with either within the community or with on campus, depending on depending on limitations and restrictions. And then another random thing, I just kind of threw it in there, is like community-supported agriculture. It's another way, like I was saying, if you're producing enough to sell it at a farmer's market, and if you're producing enough, you might be able to start a CSA share, which is like a weekly or a biweekly amount of produce that could be sold or donated, or you could do like a work share with it. So it's just another option. So it's a way to expand. Budget. So I know money might be hard to come by when it's coming to starting a garden, but it is definitely good to start a budget and think of terms of getting estimates and just basic tools that you're most likely going to need, which is, like as it says, shovels, gloves, fencing, because fencing, you got to think about it, you want to try and keep out either squirrels or deer or wherever you're at. You want to try and think how you can protect the garden from outside invaders that might want to chew on some couple salad greens. So definitely you want to keep a budget and have a good estimates, which you can reach out to local hardware stores and nurseries for those estimates. And then when you start developing partnerships, kind of think of, maybe there might be a possibility for a donation, or a possibility to get soil and compost, but in a different way that's a lot cheaper, or seeds in a way that can be donated. So you gotta like a little bit think outside the box. Definitely have that structure and that time frame and the estimates on hand, but think of a little bit outside the way to give donations, so you don't have to have a ton of costs up front. A really great resource, is the Grow to Learn NYC, and this website and organization has a ton of resources pertaining to starting a garden, maintaining a garden, weeds, pests, anything you can think of. It's a great resource, and specifically for this one, it actually gives estimates for a local hardware store. Oh, never mind. But it's a great toolkit that gives you estimates on how to purchase wood, tools, anything that you can need, and it's actually coming from like a Lowe's, which is a really common place to get any type of tool. So it is going to vary different from place to place, but it gives you a nice rough estimate, and it gives you a way to really think about it and think of in terms of how much it would cost. And a committee. So like I was saying earlier, you might want to, starting a garden by yourself is a little daunting. It's definitely doable, but to reduce your stress levels and to make it more of a community garden, and to make it more holistic and integrated, think about creating a community garden committee, or developing a new role on your leadership team, having a garden manager that would take the role of the supervisor. But this garden manager could work with the volunteer coordinator on the leadership team to help develop volunteer shifts. And you could work with the food recovery person within your leadership, if you do have one, that can work with your harvesting schedules, and you can use that harvesting to your food recovery. So there's different ways you can look into it, and it also helps divvy up the roles. Like I was saying, it would lessen the stress on one person. Maintenance plans. So you kind of, like I was saying, you need to be able to think in terms of site and size. Usually the bigger the size of the garden, the more maintenance it's going to need, along with the types of plants. So some types of plants are a little bit have more maintenance than others. So you got to think about the size, and then how much time you're going to be able to develop. How many individuals will you have dedicated to this garden to get it started? Because, like I was saying, it takes quite a bit of work to get started. So you want to develop maintenance plans, daily, weekly, seasonal. And these are just a couple examples that you would most likely do daily. You're going to be watering plants, weeding, pest management. Weekly would be harvesting and washing. Seasonal would be tilling, creating rows, and composting. So this isn't everything, but it's just a few examples on how to develop a couple plans before getting started. And now talking about grants. So I know I mentioned a lot about donations, but now we're going to focus on grants because you definitely want to try and get a little bit of grants, and that can help kickstart your garden and help fund a lot of the programs. So the first one is Whole Kids. It's actually a Whole Foods, the grocery store. This is their grant side, Whole Kids. So it's you can get small grants between like a couple thousand, and it's, excuse me, a couple thousand, and it's a grant that you can use towards funding startups and nutrition education programs. SARE grants, the Sustainable Agriculture Research and Education, is USDA, so it's a more federal grant. These are a little bit more, this would be a little bit more difficult to get to for a campus kitchen, but it's definitely something as an option. You can always do this as like a partnership grant if you're working with, say, another community organization that's starting a garden as well. You both can work together to try to get a SARE grant to do it as well. Like I was saying, this co-op extension offices, they have grant opportunities. Slow Food USA is a nonprofit that focuses heavily on local food, regional foods, food systems, and definitely gardening and small-scale urban farming. Kids Gardening is a website that does grants as well, as long as Education Outside. The Education Outside is primarily focused on nutrition education, so if you are applying for a grant, definitely make sure that nutrition education is one of the purposes of starting your garden. And now going into crop design. So there's quite a bit into crop design. It is definitely something that you don't want to rush. You want to take your time with this because it not only lays out the framework for that first season, but for seasons to come. So this is definitely an area that you want to have a little bit of expertise in, whether you have your own personal knowledge about it or if you want to reach out to those that do. So like I was saying, those partnerships with the horticulture, biology, if you have a garden on campus, you know, or a garden club, if that is available, you know, developing partnerships with them or developing connections with them to be able to ask questions comfortably and to give advice and feedback on these crop designs that you're making. So like I was saying, the layout is very important, and you want to record everything. So record the measurements, record how big this house, how big your garden is going to be, record how big you think your rows are going to be, and that is, your rows are going to be based off the types of plants because each plant has their own specific growing characteristics, so the spacing in between plants you want to take into consideration. And like I was saying, it is an intricate process, and that's why you want to reach out to those professionals or the master gardeners. And like I was saying, record everything, and you want to record everything every year, and then you can kind of see where you did well, where you didn't do well, where you can improve, where your strengths and weaknesses are. And like I was saying, to keep in mind the size, the type of plants, your growing season, your crop rotation, and labeling. So another thing I should have mentioned during the budget is you wanted to have labeling tools because, you know, especially if you have not as much knowledge, you may not know what a seedling looks like when it's starting to germinate. So being able to label those rows not only eases the work for you, but also eases the work for your volunteers as well. And this is just a couple graphics of some some garden layouts. Two are a little bit on the different side. The one on the left is a little bit more detailed than the one on the right, but they're essentially saying quite the same thing. And also, don't be afraid to draw. So I know these are both computer-generated drawings, but don't be afraid to draw things out and get your little color pencils out and start drawing, start coloring some different options. Because this isn't something you're going to get at the first try. So you want to do a couple of them, kind of play out the measurements, and don't worry if you think it's not going to be right the first time, because you want to take a couple tries at it. In talking about seedlings, so this is one of the things that you want to include in your budget, but also you want to try and see if you can get donations of seedlings as well. And if you have greenhouses on campus, connect with those garden managers or those greenhouse managers to see if whether you can have just a little bit of space for your seedlings. So if you want to start your seeds before, say you want to start them in the winter or like early spring before that last frost, get them started, and then you can transplant them in your garden. And plants. So there's many families of plants, which is going to play later into the crop rotation portion of the presentation. So this kind of just gives you a little bit of overview of the different families. Some of them look very familiar, like the parsley and the sunflower and the brassica, and something that may look very new is your nightshades or your morning glories. But as you can see, morning glory is a bit sweet potato. How yummy. So a couple cool season crops. This is something that you would either plant, and if you want to have a garden that is 4 seasons, so like say throughout the year, or from like very early spring to very late fall, these are the kind of crops that you want to plant in that very early spring or very late fall. That's how you want to play these out. And if you are interested in doing something like that, this is one technique that will help trap some heat in these rows. They're called low hoops. It's a great practice if you have the means and the materials to be able to do this. So it's pretty much you have your row, and then you put PVC pipe or metal pipes that is bent, and then you put a layer of plastic and then a layer of fabric over top. And it's essentially just like it's a low tunnel greenhouse. It's just a mini greenhouse that traps heat. So it could be, if you look at the picture on the left, or I guess you could say the picture on the right, there's snow on the ground, so you would think it's going to be pretty chilly, but once you get that low hoop over in the covering, it's actually made quite warm, and it's going to emulate like a hot summer day. And these are going to be like your warm season crops, so like I was saying, these are the ones that you normally see in your gardens, like tomatoes, snap peas, all those good things. So that's where you're going to be planting more in your mid-spring to mid-fall. And crop rotation. So like I was kind of saying with crop design and the type of plant families, crop rotation is very, very important, especially if you expect your garden to grow year after year after year. In terms of soil quality, in terms of plant quality, crop rotation is definitely something that you want to take a lot of time with when you're developing your layout, because it is so important for, like I was saying, that soil quality. If you think about it, if you're not rotating your crops, you're essentially doing like a monocrop. And so that soil is being either depleted of certain nutrients or, and then years and years and years of the same crop, the soil is going to be pretty much useless. So by crop rotation, you're adding different plant or different nutrients into the soil, but you're also, that's a great pest management best practice. It wards off, make sure the pests don't get comfortable. So there's different plants and different defenses. And like I was saying, you want to record and track your rotations each year, because you may forget, or there may be some other thing that happens, so you just want to make sure you track that rotation. And these are just 2 graphics that kind of just gives you a flow of an example of a crop rotation. As you can see on the left, it's very generic and very general, but it kind of just gives you that that basis of your first year, second year, third year, how you would rotate your crops. And now in terms of volunteers. So you're most likely going to need quite a bit of volunteers for your garden, especially during that summer months, and especially during the campus lifestyle. And you know, your summer months is usually when you have less operations, less people on hand. So developing those volunteer networks and really getting a strong volunteer base for your garden is definitely key. So reach out to those clubs. I went to Indiana University, and we had a garden on campus, and so there was a garden club, and which was a great resource if you have on your campus to get those volunteers, because they're already interested in gardening, so here's another way that they can get involved. And like I was saying, those service learning or work study students, they would be great volunteers. So make a connection with that department on your campus if available. And also think about client agencies, the people you're serving. They may be interested, they maybe have like a desire to get out, be outdoors and to be gardening and to get back into the soil. So propose that idea that this is available to them. Like I was saying, the worst thing they could do is say no. So don't count them out as a volunteer opportunity. And then also food pantries. I know here in DC, the Capital Area Food Bank, there's a garden on the grounds. And so there's a ton of volunteers that go to this garden. And so if you make a connection with these food pantries and say they're full with their volunteer shifts, but there's a ton of volunteers on their wait list, they may be willing to make a connection with you and be able to transfer these volunteers to your garden. Now this may not be the case for every place where a Kippa's Kitchen is located, but it is still an option and still a possibility. And like I was saying, those senior centers earlier, probably a lot of the seniors have quite a bit of knowledge about farming, and they'd be more than willing to just get out for a little bit. And then, like I was saying, the AmeriCorp members, the Vistas, the Food Corps, this is another network that if you can have either a Vista on hand or a Food Corps member on hand, it will help your garden operations tremendously. And then on to maintenance. So like I was saying, in terms of earlier in your needs section, how much time you're willing to devote, and then developing your scheduling around that. This is more focused on like day-to-day if you're coming across a couple weeds or pests in harvesting. And so on to weeds. So in the early stages of the seedling germinating, which is essentially when the first couple leaves come out of the soil, sometimes it could look very much like a weed. So this is another way to reach out to those professionals in terms of if you are have questions, or if you have any alarms on whether the germinating seed is either a weed or not. So here's just the common weeds that you most likely will find in your garden. These seeds are usually in the soil, so they're going to grow, especially in a garden environment where there's a ton of nutrients and a ton of water. And then also one thing when you are pulling weeds, you want to really make sure to get it straight from the root. Some of these are going to be a little bit difficult than others, but being able to get the root system out of the ground is what's really going to help, what's going to help keep the weeds down. And another thing as well, if you do mulching, which you probably will have to add to your budget if this is one option you want to go for, mulching in between the rows is a great way to deter weeds as well, because not only you're blocking all the sunlight, but as long as you're walking in between the rows, you're compacting the soil in between, and those weeds don't have a chance of growing. And then on to pests. Pests is one thing that can be either a good thing or a bad. There's obviously there's good pests that you want in your garden, and then there's some that you don't want in your garden. And these are some common ones that you may find in your garden that you don't want. And usually that's because either they're eating the good pests or they're eating your foliage and vegetation, which is not what you want. So in terms of pest management, this is where you want to try to go for those professionals that that would have better means and better ways of managing these types of pests. So reaching out to those biology, the horticulture, the entomology, all those areas, the master gardeners, the cooperative extensions as well, most likely, because they're going to know within that local county what are the pests and how best practices on how to manage it. And then now on harvesting. So depending on what type of plants you're planting, which I'm assuming in the first season is going to be not generic, but the very typical plants, tomatoes, maybe some peppers, depending on the needs of your clients and your meals operation. So just a couple tools, some scissors, knives, if possible. If you are doing knives and you have volunteers, make sure that waiver is signed for safety concerns. You need gloves, buckets, and also think about getting a scale, and then you can kind of see how much you're harvesting each week. And then you can use those records and that numbers for next year and see if you want to do more or less. And some techniques, usually you want to try and harvest either early morning or late day, just because the sun intensity is not as much, like as the slide is saying. And also when you're, in terms of harvesting volunteer shifts, it's just better in terms of a volunteer experience if you're not in direct sunlight, sweating like crazy trying to pick some tomatoes. So just another thing to keep in mind. And then storing the produce. As soon as you harvest, wash and wash very thoroughly. And then you're going to want to have to be able to dry it and then store it in refrigeration. And when you're storing and the produce, make sure you label it and label what day it was harvested, and then how long it will last. So yeah, so a couple conclusions. Take your time. So you want to try and do it right. There's definitely going to be times for mistakes, but usually it's all going to go out well in the end, especially when you have those partnerships, community and campus-wise. And then record everything. Recording is going to be your best friend. Measurements is going to be tedious and kind of annoying, but in the end it's going to be your best friend. And then also have fun. This is a great opportunity to not only expand your operations campus kitchen-wise, but it's a great way to get the community and campus involved in something that's good and delicious and great for the community. And then if you have any questions, don't hesitate to ask. This is my email. Again, my name is Emma, and I am the AmeriCorp Vista here at the office, so I have a little bit of experience. And then also reach out to your fellow campus kitchens that have gardens. Gonzaga University is a very strong program that has a great garden program, along with Baylor University, Northwestern, Boston. All these places have either mini small gardens or larger scale gardens that are very successful. And so that is the webinar for April. We miss you guys at Summit, and hopefully we'll see you next month. Bye.